tell me their tomatoes aren't setting fruit, and I'm saying, are they in full sun, and they hesitate. If they hesitate for even 10 seconds, there's your answer right there. They're not getting enough sun. If your plants aren't setting fruit, it probably has a lot to do with the amount of light they're getting.
One more thing, following up on what John said, and there really, I saw some of you kind of giggling out there, but there really is something to that, and you can take it a step further. And I know a fellow whose dad used to go out and stomp on his tomatoes, and he had the best production you've ever seen. Well, I got to thinking about that, and then I thought, well, there probably is something to that. So I went home, I got one of my wife's old tennis rackets, and I had the tomatoes in those big concrete cages, and I just beat the heck out of them. And later on, production was increased. There's no question about it. I've had people corroborate that. What goes on with that is twofold. One is you're vibrating the plant, and it's a wind or vibration pollinated plant. And two, the plant does respond to you. If that plant thinks it's in trouble, like John was saying, or if you physically are hurting the plant, it will set fruit. It's trying to set seed. It's trying to protect its genetics. It really does work.
So battered tomatoes are not necessarily a new dish. You know, all kidding aside, that's part of the principle of how, I will go over there in a second, Bruce, of how this new product called Messenger works. Messenger makes the plant think it is under attack. Messenger is derived specifically from something that causes a disease in plants. It's something called Hartman protein. And like I was just saying, when the plant thinks it's under attack, it's going to bloom, it's going to set fruit, it's going to try to make seed while it is still alive and able to do so. Question over here, or comment?
Okay, what I want to ask you first is thank you, because I have a 50 by 50 foot garden, and I've been gardening like almost 30 years, and he thinks I'm crazy because I'm talking to him. But if I not talk to him and pray and actually lecture them, they don't do as well. So I wanted you to know, just save my sanity.
Somebody sent me a wonderful email that said the reason dogs have more friends than people is that dogs wag their tails instead of their tongues. You got to talk to your plants a whole lot and don't bother the neighbors so much, and everybody's happier.
The question I have is I'm stumped. I've never heard what did the gentleman mean? What's wrong with Clorox?
Clorox. Who wants to? Which one? You want to talk against Clorox or Howard?
You said to go green, and my grandmother, God rest her soul, when she had a huge vegetable garden in Virginia, that was her Roundup. Half water, half Clorox.
Clorox. Old Clorox is not like new Clorox. New Clorox has hydrogen or sodium hydroxide.
Doesn't that turn to salt in the soil?
No, sodium hydroxide is nasty stuff. You want to talk about Clorox?
Yeah, all those things are real soluble, and so they go right down through the soil. You can use boric acid, and it's a wonderful herbicide. I shouldn't even say this. It'll kill plants like crazy, but it's soluble, and it goes right down through the soil into the water stream, and that's part of the problem with bleaches. And they're just really nasty chemicals to be around, to breathe and to go into your skin. You just don't want to be around that at all. Bad, very, very toxic chemicals.
But the Clorox in the house?
Same thing.
Okay, the other thing I need to tell you real quick about compost piles. I have probably 8, 10 huge compost piles. They're big round circle things that he got me, big circles of plastic. Well, I've run out of those. Now I use like chicken wire. I used to grind it up, 9 huge bags down to 8. It was too much dust, took too much time. Now what I do is I just put them in these big circles all around my garden, around the yard. They're not that bad looking, and I leave them full great big oak leaves, and I leave them. And I go out there every couple of years, and I dig down until I get to this black jewel dirt that's absolutely incredible. I have no bugs, the smell, I mean, it's like chocolate, you can eat it. So everybody says you don't have time to do compost piles. You don't have to do all the formulas, buy all this stuff and all that. Just put it, I don't even water them. I just leave them. And I found one the other day that I purposely left 15 years, and that soil down there is unbelievable. So, no excuse not to compost.
Static composting. Let me just tell you a bit more about chlorine. There's just a brand new study out. I don't know, last week or two I found it. They're finding out that as it gets into the water where there's other chemicals, it actually changes the identity of the chemistry and makes this stuff a hell of a lot worse than it was in the first place. Chlorine itself is a poison to you. I remember when they told us that we would shock wells with it. Folks, it's not a good idea. When chlorine mixes with organic material, it makes some nasty, nasty compounds. Clorox themselves even have warnings written. They didn't before, and as Bob has mentioned, the Clorox formula you have today wasn't the Clorox formula you had 25 years ago. This stuff is extremely stabilized. It has preservatives in it it never had before. We're not even sure what they are because they're called inert ingredients, so that means they don't have to tell us a thing about them. But if you don't think Clorox is a fun thing to be around, go on the internet and go to the MSDS sheets and read what this stuff does to you and what it does for you. You're not going to want it in your house ever again.
That's material safety data sheet. That's what MSDS means.
Yes, ma'am.
So speaking of water solubility and salt,
Yes.
I mean, they say that Roundup just turns into salt. So what's up with that?
Well, Malcolm and I fight about this all the time. Roundup does, and I'll let Malcolm give his side, Roundup does break down fairly well in most soils most of the time. What we found out, though, and this ties back into to Howard's new product, it does break down, but it also affects terribly a number of funguses. It affects terribly a number of bacteria. Even though it may break down in warm soils, don't do it in cold soil. It is still not good for your soil. I'll let Malcolm defend it because his answer is, and it's still legitimate, at this point for huge acreage, what do we do? And I don't have a great answer for that. But I think all of us that do small gardening, we have no use in Roundup anywhere around anything that we're growing. I just think it's detrimental to the health of the soil.
Before you pass the microphone, one of the questions was, I have weeds that were sprayed with Roundup. Can they go in the compost pile?
Roundup breaks down fairly fast. I looked at Roundup as at least two evils. When I was truck foreman, I built up that old farm I had where it was really super rich. It took me quite a few years of cover crops, compost, and stuff like that. And I had 5 acres of it fenced in. I never did let that Johnson grass grow, but outside of that fence, the Johnson grass got big. It was 6 foot tall and thick. Well, I needed another 5 acres for my truck farm. So how am I going to kill that Johnson grass? Well, I'm organic, I can't use Roundup. So I plow it to death. Don't kid yourself. You don't know how many times I chiseled this direction, let it dry, and I chiseled this direction, let it dry, and I kept doing that. And pretty soon I destroyed all the earthworms, all the fine root hairs, and I oxidized the salt to the air, lost all the carbon out of the soil. And here came a 2-inch rain now. We really had a big crop of Johnson grass. So then I studied up on Roundup. And actually I talked to Dr. Don Marks. And I asked him, I said, if I want to kill plants or weeds or anything, it's better to use Roundup or plow them out. He said, well, if you give me those 2 situations, I'd much better you use Roundup. I said, why is that? He said, when you plow a weed out, you destroy the root and all the mycorrhizal fungi before it gets a chance to put out spores or seed. If you use Roundup, he says it dies slow, and that mycorrhizal fungi realizes it's no longer getting any energy from that plant, so it quickly puts out spores or seeds. So when the next plant grows there, it can be inoculated. So I called Dr. Elaine Ingram. She's a Far West authority on the soil food web. And I asked her, I said, well, tell me about Roundup. She said, well, look at the formula. It's carbohydrates, sugar, nitrogen, and phosphorus. What makes it work? What makes it work is, I learned this accidentally from meeting an old man that was in research and development for Monsanto. He said they tested 4,000 surfactants to make it penetrate the green. So you overloaded the plant with carbohydrates, nitrogen, and phosphorus. That's what kills it. I said, yeah, but how about that surfactant? He said, well, in your area, when it hits the soil, in 4 days it's gone, there's no evidence. He said, however, up north, like border, that stuff may stay there forever, and they don't know what's going to happen there. So you got to weigh everything, which is the least damaging to the environment. Now, really, to get rid of those weeds and Johnson grass in an environmental way was to fence it and put sheep, goats, or cattle in there for about 2.5 years, and they will wipe out the Johnson grass or anything. They'll completely knock it out, and it do good for the soil. So anyway, you have to be the judge in each situation. John Rosell.
Well, the only thing I can say about Roundup is that Monsanto company makes it. It's their #1 product, and they're one of the biggest poison sources probably in the world.
There's genetic brands other people make it. No. Just go with all of it.
Renego.
Most of the farmers that we work with use Roundup, and we come back in, get the biological activity, biodegrade it. we're degrading compounds that are much, much worse than Roundup. We're working on dildrin, which is a compound that's been around for 40 years, and we're breaking it down. With Medina soil activator, a specific hydrocarbon degrading bacteria, and some nutrients that we use in biological remediation.